One of the things that is really interesting about growth is that it brings you to the edge of yourself and the edge of what you are capable of and asks you to go deeper. And life is hard, and parenting is hard, and being in relationships is hard. And so when we don't have compassion, we are basically adding more weight to that process. We are adding more difficulty to the process of healing when we can't offer ourselves compassion. And this is particularly difficult because we weren't often parented with a lot of compassion. A lot of times we were parented with shame, and we were parented in a way that taught us to sort of stuff down our feelings instead of honor them. So self-compassion is really difficult to learn, but we can absolutely learn it. And sometimes it's really helpful to imagine somebody else telling you your story. And when you think of your own story, that you can listen to it as if you're listening to a friend. Because most often you would not speak to your friends the way that you speak to yourself. Most often you would not speak to your children or your partner or your coworker or anybody else the way that you speak to yourself. And oftentimes we reserve our harshest words, our harshest feelings, the least amount of patience for ourselves, and we feel like we can understand how somebody else might have dealt with that, but we can't understand it when it's ourselves. So we want to think of our story as if somebody else is sharing the story. So let me give an example so that this is a little bit less abstract. So let's say you had a really difficult day with your child, and you totally blew up on them, and you had a lot of stress going on. Maybe you weren't, you didn't sleep very well. You're stressed with what's going on with work, and all of that boiled over, and you had a really negative interaction with your child. It's really, really easy to look at that interaction and feel so much shame, feel so much judgment, feel like I should have done better. If only I would have done this. Why can't I ever get it right? What is wrong with me? Why am I such a jerk? Why can't I just do it right? And it's really easy to say those things to ourselves sometimes, but we would never say that to a friend. I can't think of very many people who would hear a friend saying, oh my gosh, I've been so stressed at work and I haven't been sleeping. My child's been, waking up in the middle of the night. My baby's been waking up in the middle of the night, and I just lost it on my 3-year-old. If your friend said that to you, I just can't hear you saying to your friend, God, you're such a fuck up. What is wrong with you? Why would you do that? I can't believe what kind of person are you? You wouldn't say that to your friend. You wouldn't say that to your friend. You would say something along the lines of, oh my gosh, it's so hard when your baby's waking up in the middle of the night. Oh, don't be so hard on yourself. Give yourself a break. You've got a lot going on right now. There's so much stress in your life right now. You would find compassion for them, even though you know that they shouldn't have blown up on their child, even though you know that yelling, causes harm, even though you know all of that. You wouldn't pile on the shame for somebody you love dearly. You just wouldn't do that. But when it's ourselves, we often do. And there's an element of punishment here. There's an element of self-loathing and self-punishment that's almost that's oftentimes at play because we try and avoid pain. And so there's sometimes this idea that if I can make myself feel badly enough about what I did, maybe I won't do it again. If I can just shame myself far enough, maybe I won't do it again. And That's just not true. When we feel badly, we act badly, and oftentimes this is true in our parenting and even in our adult relationships too. We make someone, if we feel like if we make someone feel badly enough, maybe they won't do it again. But it's not when we're feeling badly that we behave the best. It's when we're feeling healthy, when we're feeling connected, when we're feeling like everything is right, when we have all of our needs met, is when we're acting our best. And so we want to be able to offer that same understanding to ourselves and stop offering the shame. The shame doesn't help us. The shame isn't going to help you make the changes. Now, of course, it's helpful to truly look at, the harm we're causing to ourselves or to others. That's important. That's important for being able to take good accountability, to look at the harm. But there's a difference between looking at the harm and sitting in that moment of difficulty and rubbing someone's face in it and shoving someone's face into their mistake. And so much of the time, that's what we do to ourselves. We are shoving our own face in the mistake we made. And we want to stop. We want to stop doing that. And we want to begin to answer ourselves like we would answer a dear friend, like we would answer a little tiny human who's learning. We might be able to say something to ourselves like, yeah, that was a really hard day. And on top of that, you blew it with your daughter. That sounds really yucky. That sounds really sad. Are you needing someone to listen, or are you looking for solutions? And we would just show up for that person in a meaningful way. And we want to learn how to show up for ourselves in a meaningful way. It's so powerful to have this deeply sad moment and have our wise parenting self answer us. Have our wise parenting self answer in a way that we deserved, in a way that probably wasn't modeled for us. And a lot of this journey with self-compassion is this part of it is us reparenting ourselves, us showing up for our child self who's probably activated in that moment, and speaking wisdom from a loving, compassionate voice. And that can feel really weird at first because you're literally talking to yourself, but it's really important because so many of us weren't allowed to speak up. So many of us didn't have someone there, didn't have someone to lovingly process our stuff with us. And we needed that. We still need that in order to move past things. And so as we learn to have compassion for ourselves, we want to learn to reparent ourselves, and we link those two together. We look at our story from a place of compassion, and then we reparent. We come back with our wise parent self, and we answer. And we answer the real question, the real statement, the real pain that's behind that behavior. Because behavior is just communication. Behavior is information. And so when we are behaving in a way that is less than ideal, that's information from our body that we're struggling. And so instead of looking at that with contempt and judgment, we want to look at that with compassion and ask curious questions like, why did yelling feel like the best choice there? Why did it feel like saying that mean thing was helpful? What about that felt good for you? And that's a loving question to ask from wise self. So if I ask that to my child self, how come, sweetie? Why did you want to say that to him? Because he's such a jerk and he does this all the time. Really letting that child self engage. I'm mad. I wanted him to know. I wanted him to stop doing that. Yeah. It's so frustrating when you don't know what to do. And you've talked to him about this so many times and nothing's working. Yeah, nothing's working. And you're really going back and forth, allowing yourself to feel heard. And one of the things we're doing here is using reflective listening with our child self. We're speaking with wise parent self using the skill reflective listening. And we're honoring that voice inside of us. We're honoring that piece of us that was struggling to regulate. When we are offering our worst behavior, it's because we're likely struggling to regulate. When we're having a hard time regulating, we're not offering kind, gentle, skillful responses. So if I'm struggling to regulate, then what I need is somebody to help me regulate. And ideally, you have somebody else who can help you with that, but sometimes you don't, and you need to be able to offer that to yourself. It's so powerful to be able to reach in and first before you can even answer child self, it's important to be able to hear child self. It's important to be able to connect with that part of you that's struggling, connect with that part of you that's acting out. And if we can look at ourselves like a child who's struggling and a child who's acting out, then we can see ourselves as somebody who needs help. And if we can do that, then we can offer compassion. And compassion is this beautiful salve that offers so much healing. So we want to trade in this idea that if we punish ourselves, we will do better. We don't do better by facing punishment or shame. We do better by facing compassion and healing and new skills and understanding. We can flourish when we can share our big sad story with someone and have them show up for us with non-judgment. If you were talking to a dear friend and you were telling them how difficult something was and they immediately started piling on shame, you would probably stop talking. And that's what happened to a lot of us as kids. We shared what was going on and somebody piled on deep shame. Well, you shouldn't have done that. You know I've told you a bunch of times all of these shame statements. Why can't you ever? Why can't you ever do what I say? Whatever it was that, your family's version of those shame statements, we were given shame often when we were struggling. And what it does is it shuts us down. It tells us don't share. And so we learn to shut it down and go inward, and then we take on these voices and begin to say them to ourselves when we're struggling. So one of the first things that you can do is listen. Listen when you make a mistake. Listen when you feel like you've blown it. What do you hear? What do you say to yourself? Start taking some inventory. What do I say to myself when I have made a mistake? What do I say to myself hoping that I'll do better? You start writing them down. And then you can start making the connection. Whose voice does this sound like? Who does this sound like? After you take some inventory, you'll start to see some patterns emerge. You'll start to see, wow, boy, this sounds a lot like my dad, or boy, this sounds a lot like my grandma. Whoever this sounds like, what was the main message? What was the main emotional message that came across? Probably a feeling of being bad. I'm not good enough. I'm bad. I should do better. I should do what's right. Why can't I do what's right? There's this message of badness often that we carry, and we want to snuff that out. But the way that we try to do that is through more shame, and it doesn't work. So we start to notice that pattern emerge, and then we think, what did child self need to hear? What would I have needed to hear in order to share more instead of shut down? And then we start saying that to ourselves. Oh, sweetie, you were so mad that you hit. What happened, honey? What happened with your brother that you felt like hitting? Imagine if we were parented that way. Imagine if somebody was able to work through our feelings with us when we were kids, when we were hitting, when we were taking, instead of somebody, modeling more taking, or modeling, smacking us, or shaming us, or whatever it was. What a different world it would be. And we can't go back, but we can be here. Because these shame statements that come up when we're struggling, they're basically our body's way of highlighting our wounds. And if we can pay attention to those wounds, we can start answering them, we can speak to them, we can start healing them, not only for ourselves, but so we change what we're passing on. So this story of self-compassion is so key. We can't get very far in our growth without self-compassion. And so sometimes it's helpful to sort of write out what your story is. I lost it with my kids, or I totally blew it at work, or whatever it happens to be. I did this, such and such happened, such and such happened. And then we look at that list as if it were from somebody else, as if it was from somebody that we deeply care about, somebody that we do find compassion for. And then we learn to start saying that to ourselves. Eventually, you won't need to pretend it's somebody else telling you that story. Eventually, you'll be able to look at yourself and say, oh, sweetie, oh, I'm sorry you're having such a hard day. This feels really bad. What do you need, honey? Yeah, we can sit on the couch for a while. Eventually, you'll be able to have this back and forth. But it takes time, practicing looking deeply, practicing listening to what is child self saying. What do I want to say? What do I want to say out loud, but I know I shouldn't say? That's often the voice of child self speaking up. So it takes practice learning to hear that, and then it takes practice learning how to respond to that. You deserve compassion. I guarantee if you told me your story, that I could find compassion for you. And I guarantee if you told somebody else your story that is practiced in compassion, they would be able to find reasons why you deserve compassion. Sometimes we have a blind spot when it comes to ourselves and the areas in which we deserve compassion. But you deserve it too. You deserve somebody to show up for you. You deserve somebody to show you deep, deep love, deep listening. And when you can learn to offer that to yourself, healing is so available. Powerful, powerful changes are available. And it's through our deep compassion that we make space for that. My suggestion is that you go back and you do, and you look at the reflective listening unit, because that is going to be one of the tools that you use as you're listening to yourself, as you're showing up for yourself. That's going to be powerful. So I would revisit that and see how you can apply that to yourself. Try and have a conversation with yourself where you're playing both parts, where you're showing up and you're venting and you're saying what you need to say, and you're also playing the part of loving, kind parent, loving, wise mama, or loving, wise papa who answers the child who's struggling. Give it a try and let me know how it goes.